So not zero and all other environmental regulations and legislations, how does it all impact property investors and developers? So to explore all that, I'm joined by John Howard. Are you a nut zero fan? Do you like Ed Millipede?
Do you know what? That's a great title, Ranjan. Well done. That's one of your best ones yet, I think. Very, very good. Well, I've got news for Ed Miliband, and that is he won't be in the government very long. That's my prediction.
Well, he hasn't got a clue, really. He really hasn't got a clue. I mean, I think nut zero is economic suicide. But it is impacting us as developers. Let's look at the developer angle. I mean, I can see from flats that we're making, if I look at the building regulations requirements, say a decade ago, and look at what they are now.
Change every year for the worst.
They change every year, but are they really changing for the better? You know, when they say, you know, these are insulation, nicely insulated and all the rest of it, but I really wonder what the environmental impact is of the building materials that I'm actually putting into these buildings to achieve this.
Yeah, you're right, because there's more and more materials required. So they're coming from somewhere. It's a little bit like the electric cars and the batteries, which we won't go into and all that. But I mean, you're absolutely right. But the problem with our friend Ed is that the government have now realised, after not the brightest, it's taken them a number of months to realise, but that, you know, all this carbon neutral and all this sort of stuff, it's holding back growth. And, you know, they've only got to look at electricity, for instance, which for commercial industrial buildings and so on is 6 times more expensive in the UK than in America. Now,
John, I agree with you that, you know, this is nutty and all the rest of it, but what I'm not convinced of is that the government actually realise that. I think they're still on their ideological ego trip that this is the best thing since sliced bread.
Well, it's not just them. If you remember, Boris Johnson was pretty adamant about all this, and before that, Theresa May, she couldn't find a legacy. And every Prime Minister wants to leave a legacy. And the only legacy she could find, or they agreed to, was to be carbon neutral by 2050. And that is set in law. So that was her what did I call it?
Ball and change.
Ball and change, almost, yeah. Economy. That's her legacy. Now, the legacy should be that she got rid of the police in 2011 or something. It's caused all sorts of problems, and they've had to recruit ever since. But anyway, that's another story. Or she couldn't get Brexit done.
I think legacy should be achieved in the lifetime of your
Well, you would have thought so.
Don't put some milestone years ahead.
But so it's not just the Labour government, to be fair to them, it's the Conservative government being hell-bent. If you remember, you know, EPCs were meant to be done by 2025. It's C upwards for landlords. Then Rishi brought it in and said, no, that's silly, which it was, 2028. And now Labour have had to push it back to 2030. So they are starting to register the fact that these things aren't possible. And one person who is in the government, who I spoke to, the old government, I should say, recently said, you know what, John, the problem is with all this stuff, it's like the cars, electric cars and everything, you have to take the public with you. And if you don't take the public with you, whatever you might want to do and say doesn't happen. And that's their problem, is that, yes, we all want to do things for the environment. We all want to improve the environment. Of course we do. And that includes construction and all the rest of it. But there's some, you know, there are some things that are happening which are stopping construction happening, which is absolutely, utterly bonkers. And the other thing is this. Things are moving forward so quickly, new ideas, technology. So you'll get to carbon neutral in 2050 with it anyway. It's not going to be a problem, I don't think, in the future. But they're trying to do it so quickly. And of course, we're way ahead of virtually every other European country.
They are, I mean, I think this is probably getting on to other things here, but it is...
We never do that.
There is just no point in strangling our economy.
No.
And if you look at what China have done, they've said, look, you know what, fossil fuels, we're going to go for it. but also they're not cutting back on anything really, they're just carrying on. But also they are using the fact that they're generating energy from fossil fuels and all that to invest in the energy efficient stuff.
Electric cars is one thing.
If you want car batteries, if you want solar panels, it's all coming from China.
Absolutely.
All the tech for environmental stuff is coming from China.
Yeah.
So the argument that we strangle ourselves now, have high energy costs, and we're suddenly going to produce all these green solutions is for the birds. What China have done is they've gone ahead with the fossil fuel stuff, but they're so green with the tech that they've built.
But getting back to the subject, if we may.
Oh yeah, we might as well do that.
It would help.
Yeah.
You're meant to be in charge of these shows. Getting back to the point, the more you put on developers like ourselves and investors who have got to upgrade these properties and all the rest of it, the more it costs the end user, whether it is a tenant or whether it is a first-time buyer or whatever. And that is the problem. They are loading everything so much with all this extra regulation, building control, everything else, to such a level now where it's cost so much more than it needs to for young people to get on the housing ladder and tenants. I mean, some people don't want to get on the housing ladder. Some people are happy to rent all their lives. You know, whatever it might be, it's costing so much more. You know, and then we've got a plan. Just in planning alone, the stuff you have to go through from ecology, flood risk assessments, because allegedly the tide's rising and all this business. It's not just about flooding in a certain area. Now you have to prove, if you're near the coast, that they're estimated that the tide's going to rise by so much, which means you've got to do all these other things. It goes on and on and on. It doesn't stop, and it's a major, major problem, and it's stopping a lot of house building happening because people are saying, you know what, it's too much hassle to do. And it's also delaying so much of the development, so much in these developments. Talking to a large housing developer recently, and he said, John, you know, preconditions, as we all know, are taking forever to get sorted out with the local authorities, and the green, what I call the green policies and everything else. You know, air source heat pumps is a great one. So we had to put 22 of the damn things in on a conversion. Well, they don't work on a conversion because, you know, they work on brand new airtight buildings which are high in insulation. You can't use the same system in a conversion, and it just doesn't work.
I don't realise that. And I think the other thing with air source heat pumps is the fact that you need an air in and an air out.
Yeah.
And the diameter of the pipes is wider than, you know, a 4-inch soil stack. Yeah. I think it's about 6 inch or something like that. So if you're going to need a pipe, air in, air out for each apartment,
it's bonkers.
By the time you've been down the 3rd, 4th floor, you need masses of space to accommodate all this piping.
And guess what? It has to be run by electricity.
It doesn't work.
And they're expensive.
Yes, it doesn't quite work.
There's so many of these other ideas about, you know, putting pipes down into the ground to get heat out of the ground. Just bonkers. I mean, it comes out lukewarm.
I think, you know, environmental is great if you focus on the enviro, but don't make it mental. That's the thing.
You're sharp today. Must be that lunch I've bought you. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, yes, I did buy lunch. What a surprise there. So, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I don't
Thank you, by the way, for the lunch.
That's my pleasure. And I don't see where this is going to change, because the Conservatives didn't change it, didn't try and adapt it. Labour certainly aren't going to do that. They're all full of lefty wannabes and do-gooders. So, you know, what is going to happen? How do we have to wait until perhaps Nigel is in 5 years' time, potentially? Who knows?
Oh, he'll do away with it. Here's the elephant in the room, which I don't hear too many people talk about. Take a Victorian house. Yes. Right? Victorian houses are built the same up and down the land.
Yes.
So I've got a Victorian house in Putney, say. One's lived in by an owner-occupier. They have to do nothing.
Yep.
One is a buy-to-let property. They have to do everything to upgrade. Fine. the Putney Victorian house is high value, and the upgrades are worth it.
Yes.
You've got the identical Victorian house in Doncaster.
Yep. Donny.
Buy-to-let.
It's called Donny to the locals, by the way.
Is it going to be economically viable to make the necessary upgrades to achieve grade
Absolutely
C?
no chance whatsoever in doing that.
How are you going to have... Is everyone going to be put into brand new high-rises and no one can rent an older property?
The only way that works if there's grants given. And the problem with grants given, if you remember a few years ago, I had a very great friend of mine, architect we used an awful lot. He died in his mid-80s, and he was very proud of his windmill in his garden. He was on the first. He was left of centre, to be fair, and he had this windmill, you know, to create electricity. And I'm round there one day, and he's so proud of this windmill. He said, look at this. He said, I said, how's it going, Rodney, the windmill? He said, well, it's okay when the wind blows. He said, we might be able to make a cup of tea with it today. I said, sorry? He said, well, we might have enough energy to switch the kettle on for a cup of tea in the next hour because it's getting a bit windier. I mean, it's just crazy. And in those days, there was a big grant. So he got a grant of something like 14,000 to put this wind turbine up, somewhat in his garden. But the company charged him nearly 30,000. Now, probably, and I don't know for definite, that wind turbine, if there wasn't a grant, would probably be 15,000. And the government, you know, everyone's just being ripped off on these grants. So where does it stop?
I am very sceptical about grants for that
so
reason.
Sceptical. The government stopped them on by the way, and they stopped them on solar. I mean, solar's another one, wasn't it? I mean, you know, the sun doesn't shine. What do you do?
I mean, they've got a lot better.
They have,
we're not the best. It's not. We're not the
best country for that. I mean, the wind farms, offshore wind farms, are brilliant for us. We're better than anyone in Europe because we've got lots of sea and lots of wind. And I can understand that. But the problem with the wind, and I do some deals up. I'm doing some stuff up in Scotland at the moment, and there's wind turbines everywhere. I mean, I don't know whether you think they're decimating the countryside or whether they're fine. I've got mixed feelings about them. But the problem they say they've got there is we've got too much energy, and we've got no way of getting it down south in a storage wise to use it enough. So they're wasting all this energy they're producing because they can't. But hang on a minute, Scotland's electricity bills are expensive as ours. So why is that? Because the electricity is going from the shoreline straight to someone, isn't it? How does it work? Madness.
You raise an interesting point. I think the problem that most, you said you've got to take people with you, you've got to take the population
with you. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the UK population don't really see anything.
Don't see any benefit.
Don't see any benefit. Because the electricity isn't going down, because apparently that's due to the way it's charged. So when you feed into the grid,
right,
a unit of electricity is priced the same. So if you think about it, if it's wind, it can't be the same cost of generation as coal power or nuclear generation, but the unit price for electricity, no matter how it's generated, is the same.
Ranjan,
so the system is odd.
Is a con.
Yeah, of course it's a con.
And all these utility companies, you know, if you see the bill, it's got a green tax and all this. It's crazy. It's wrong. It's an absolute con. We've been conned for years with it. And Mr. Ed Miliband, I think he won't be there long. And the reason I think that is because the Labour government are twigging that actually you can't keep loading people with all this carbon neutral green policies to the point where there's no growth, and he'll fall out with them because ultimately that's all he's interested in. He's an absolute, I say he's a socialist, he's probably Marxist, I don't know, but you know, he's an absolute nutter.
I know he's a nutter, but I think it's full of nutters, and I think you're crediting them with too much when you think they're going to kind of let him go for that reason.
I think he'll fall out. He'll fall out with Rachel from accounts. They'll both be gone, by the way. I mean, you don't get rid of Rachel from accounts or potentially Miliband until it suits them, because they'll get all the bad news out of the way, let them take all the stick, and then they'll get rid of them.
So my view on the regulation is it's not going to get any better under this government. I don't think it can. I don't think it'll go as far. Well, the EPCs are an interesting one because they didn't stick to
They didn't bring it back to 2026, say, about, you've got to be a C for landlords. They didn't even stick to Rushy's 2028. They've put it 2030. So that tells me they're starting to be more sensible. That Ed Miliband has probably thrown his toys out of his pram hearing that noise, hearing that news. I don't know. But I mean, that's more practical, isn't it? To say, well, you as a landlord, you've got to get it to C by 2030. And by the way, if you've got a listed building or you've got a building that is in very poor condition, there are exceptions to that rule. There are exceptions.
There are not. I don't think there are many. I think it's kicking the can down the road.
Of course it is, yeah.
And there are a lot of buildings where it's going to be very difficult or prohibitively expensive. And at the end of the day, a lot of these measures, you may have to turf out the tenants.
You would have to.
And then do the works.
Yes.
You know, if you're going to put in internal, I know in some places you can put external cladding insulation, but if you're in a conservation area,
and it's expensive.
Of course it's expensive. You have to do it internally then, and then you have to throw out the tenants. You have to get back the possession of the property. There's a huge cost. It's not just the cost of the labour and materials, it's the cost of lost rent.
And the other problem, these EPCs need to be sorted out, the calculations, how it works, because if you have a gas boiler, you can potentially get a C or B. If it's an electric boiler, it goes down one grade, if not 2 grades. Now, why that is, I do not know. There'll be people watching the show, I'm sure, can answer that better than I can. I can't answer it. But it's madness. And they want to get rid of gas boilers, by the way, don't forget. That's the other thing. They're gone. Is it 2026? No gas boilers or something? And what's going to happen to all the companies that deliver oil in tanks? You know, lorries. It's bonkers.
And what's going to happen to existing properties that already have a gas boiler and those?
Well, you'll have to replace it. That's what they're saying. You'll have to replace it after 2000. What's going to be 2026? I don't know what they're doing about that. I've lost the will to live. But everyone's going to put brand new gas boilers in before that, or buy them in bulk or whatever, aren't they? I mean, what happens to people? Smuggle them. I mean, what happens for the manufacturers that specialise in gas boilers? I mean, it's bonkers. The whole thing is crackers. And the EPC is going down because you're putting electric boiler in, which is what they want, by the way, not gas. How does that work?
So so we're affected basically by the building regulations that impose the way we need to build a property.
Sure.
And there is a lot of evidence, not just anecdotal but factual evidence, is that when people are in insulated homes, better insulated homes, I don't know if you've heard this, after a couple of years, their heating consumption in terms of energy doesn't decrease. Because what happens is, before you had the well-insulated home, you wear a jumper, and a couple of years later, you just wear a T-shirt. So you're around the house in a T-shirt, your home's insulated, but your heat's on a little bit more. But before the insulation, you could never put your heating, it doesn't matter how much you put the heating on, you'd never get it warm enough to walk around in a T-shirt. So all it's done is change people's behaviour, but it hasn't really reduced the energy consumption.
Do you believe that or not?
Well, I do, because it's statistics. They've said that
you can make anything out of them.
They've done some, you can, but they've done some studies, and they found after 18 months, the heating consumption starts to rise because the behaviour changes, and people wear T-shirts around the house, basically.
The other issue we are forgetting with all this is the cost that's thrown onto the tenant. You know, if you're paying a load more money, having to upgrade and this, that, the other, you know, that money has to be found somewhere. And it's likely to be found in a higher rent than it would have been otherwise.
Sadly, it's going to be reduced supply and higher rents, because you would take the view that, well, can I really be bothered to spend all this money on upgrading, or should I just sell to an owner-occupier, because they're not subject to the same EPC requirement?
No.
So let an owner-occupier
They're not yet, but they will be.
I think that would be a massive issue, because what you're potentially saying to owner-occupiers, that the state is going to come in and declare your property valueless.
Well, that's what Ed Miliband has suggested.
Well,
but he's also suggesting it comes with grants.
I think
and they were saying how many billions and billions of pounds it would cost to do.
There'd be riots. you know, it
years
would be,
ago though, years ago, and you'll remember this from 1962. So my parents told me, no, years ago, there was a grant to insulate your lofts, wasn't there? Probably still is in some councils. There was a grant, but there was also a grant to put solar in it. I got a thing from my local authority the other week saying, you know, they're clubbing together a whole load of people to then buy it cheap or something, the solar panels. But I mean, there was always grants available for insulation, roof insulation. And some of it, and my mother actually, years ago, she's very proud of the fact she got a cavity wall insulation grant as well. She didn't damn well need it. And I don't think it made a huge difference, it might have done, but yeah, she got a grant for that as well.
I think this is quite different because unlike those sort of grants, I mean, this is basically saying you cannot sell your property. No one can buy it, and it has a mortgage value. It's unmortgageable.
It's unmortgageable, and what I would say, of course, absolutely, because the EPC thing, you know, I'm guessing now, but certainly in the future, if your house has got a D or E rating, I bet it becomes unmortgageable.
Yes, but
I bet you can't sell the damn thing.
But that is force. So in the old days,
that's the way the government will do it.
Yeah, but in the old days, it was voluntary. If I want a cavity wall, I'll do it. I'll take the grant. If I don't, I don't. Yeah. But to do it this way, I think would be wrong, because if you are selling your house and you haven't got the money and the grant doesn't cover it, then what? It's going to have a...
Sell it cheaper and the person buying it has to do it, I suppose. Well, but I don't know. But it's... and then you've got all the listed buildings. I mean, my house dates back to 1200. I wish it didn't.
They are exempt.
They are exempt. But I mean, it's huge cost of running a house like that.
The thing that isn't exempt, though, necessarily, is conservation area. So
no, that's very true.
You can't do the external cladding. Often you can't do...
Can't put solar on.
You can't do much with the windows.
Can't put Sky Dish up.
Who wants that?
Well, no one has them anymore, do they? I've still got one, but no one else has. No, I shouldn't have it I shouldn't have it on well, it's in the grounds of the listed building, to be fair, but I shouldn't have that probably, should I? But there we go.
But I think we can say, John, that it is nutty, but it seems at the moment that homeowners aren't held to the same yardstick of accountability as developers and buy-to-let landlords.
No, and I think absolutely right. Any new property, you could argue it's the right thing to do, but not to go mad. But EPCs is the right thing to do, isn't it, for the new stuff? For the tenants, for the landlords, it's a difficult one. Haven't got the money, it's very difficult. At least they've given us 5 years now to do it. But my prediction overall is Ed Miliband will be out of a job within 12 months. There you go.
Well, tell us what you think.
Yeah.
Do you think, apparently he will lose his seat at the next election based on current polls.
She'll help canvass, go up and help canvass.
I might join you actually.
Yeah.
So are you in favour of Nut Zero? Let us know in the comments below. That's it for this video. See you guys next time.
Bye-bye.